This is Karen with NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze with Eric Teplitz. And for those of you who know, I met Eric through Podmatch, and Eric is also a podcaster, amongst so many other hats that you wear, although he's not wearing a hat right now. He's wearing a headset. And from my first encounter with Eric, I realized that our messages are so aligned that I wanted Eric to come on here once a month and share his perspective, because we are walking through a maze every single day. And I don't know about any of you that woke up this morning here in Cleveland, Ohio, on April 19th. We had snow, and it was significant. It's all melted now. But you wake up in spring expecting it to be nice out, expecting that, you're going to go from one step to another. And this is how your day is going to play out. My day has not played out like that at all. And normally it doesn't. And that's why when I can talk to individuals like Eric, I can hear many of my same curious thoughts that he's going through as well. And in addition to that, we all want to congratulate Eric, because last week you posted your first podcast.
Yes, I did. Actually, it was 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. So what was that like? Let's start there with you. Like, I know you've been recording them and putting them in sequence. Didn't you, after you recorded, didn't you just like want to throw it out there for the masses?
Well, I put a good amount of thought into this before I jumped in. So it's funny. I don't know how long it's sort of been a dream of mine, certainly predating podcasting, though, for sure. I always fantasized about having a show where I could interview guests. And honestly, from a very selfish place, like, wouldn't it be great to have on people that I admire and get to pick their brains? Terrible expression, I know, but get to chat with them and ask them all kinds of questions that I am, naturally curious about and wanting to know, and getting to hear it directly from them. So this is, like, again, a fantasy of mine that dates back quite some time. I had the experience, I don't remember if I mentioned it before on this show, but I had the experience when I was in my 20s through just a wonderful sort of set of circumstances and realizing and seizing an opportunity. I got to interview one of my all-time heroes, Billy Joel. And that was really, and it was an amazing experience. I was 23 years old. He was 46 at the time. And, a hero of mine from childhood on. And so I was very, very well acquainted and actually very well prepared to interview him, because I knew, I didn't have to do any research, and it was a mixture of things to get to talk with him. It was obviously a thrill, right? But it was a strange combination of other things. Once the conversation got started, and believe me, I was a pile of nerves beforehand. I probably wrote down my name so I wouldn't forget it. I actually had that happen to me when I was a kid in line for an autograph at, of all things, a Doctor Who convention. And I was, one of the guests was signing autographs, one of the stars of the show. And I had my book with me that I was going to have her sign. And I, presented it to her when it was my turn in line. And she said, "What's your name?" so that she could inscribe it to me. And I completely blanked out. I was in such just, I was so overwhelmed. So I made sure for Billy Joel to write down everything that I might be called upon to say, even my name. Okay. This is a very long-winded story. But what I was going to say is that interviewing him really, while it was a total thrill and really a dream, sure. It was also very odd because once the interview got started, it felt very normal. And it kind of felt like I was talking with my high school music teacher, in the sense that that's a guy that I admired a lot. He taught me an incredible amount about music, and he was far more, accomplished and experienced in music than I was. But it kind of felt like that. Like, he's just a guy. He's just a human being.
Right.
And we're having this conversation. What was really cool is I didn't know how much time I was going to get with him. I wasn't told in advance, like, you got 5 minutes. I thought maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 tops. He talked to me for an hour. I was completely floored. And what happened was, even though I definitely had my questions prepared in advance, it became a conversation. And I, deviated from the script whenever it felt right and natural. And it became this just conversation. So anyway, that was like your first interview off the bat is like one of your all-time heroes.
Right.
I don't think I'd ever conducted an interview before that. But I always thought it would be really cool to have my own show. But I like to do things my own way kind of person. And while I enjoyed growing up watching the late night talk shows, it was always, such a short amount of time with the guests. And most of the time, the interviews were very superficial. And I really always appreciated and loved more in-depth interviews that really got into stuff. And so, Rolling Stone would publish lots of great interviews with musicians, and they were lengthy, and I always appreciated those, not just with musicians, but I always appreciated the sort of deeper, the deeper and lengthier interviews. And so when podcasting's been around now for quite a long time, and who knows how long. It's only probably fairly recently that I considered seriously starting my own podcast. But I knew that I wanted to, first of all, interview people that were of interest to me, and not be assigned people to interview, I don't have to worry about that. And I also knew that I wanted to dive deep, not just have superficial conversations, but really kind of dive deep and maybe ask questions that the subject is not used to being asked. I mean, you can't avoid that completely. But I remember that was one of the things that made me really proud about my interview with Billy Joel was, here's a guy who's been asked the same questions millions of times over and over again. And I wanted to try at least to ask him one or two things maybe that he had never been asked. And I knew I hit the bullseye because I could tell by his response to a question that he probably hadn't been asked it before, and he was intrigued by it. And that felt like such a huge accomplishment, right?
Right.
But to be sure, the desire to interview people, first of all, it's something that I do naturally anyway in my everyday life. I mean, I would like to think I don't grill people, but when I'm interested and curious, I naturally ask lots of questions, and I have no qualms if I'm going to a live event and the person is, somewhat well known. I'll go up to them afterwards and ask a question if I have, or even here in Los Angeles, right, pre-COVID, there used to be many events where they would have Q&A, they would have a film screening, and then they would have a Q&A with the filmmakers. I was never shy about asking a question, whether it was in front of the whole audience or afterwards privately or more privately, because I'm just a very, very naturally curious guy. So yeah, this idea, and it had been percolating for years about having some kind of talk show. I really appreciate the longer form podcasts a la Tim Ferriss, where he gets on, of course, super interesting and accomplished people, but he really goes deep, and the interviews are absolutely, they're really substantive. Anyway, that's a long answer to, I think, what you were asking. So when I decided to do this myself, you were asking about how did I decide to record them in advance rather than just put them out immediately. Obviously, there's pros and cons, right? There's trade-offs. If you do an interview live and then you immediately distribute it, your work is done, and it's a lot easier in a sense. You can also be much more prolific about putting material out there. My motivation for doing this is, yes, of course, I would like to increase my visibility and have people more aware of the services that I provide, which, by the way, are one-on-one coaching. And I also have an online course that I'm super proud of that I would love people to know about, which is called Opening to Greater Possibilities. I have a blog with literally over 100 articles on them, and they're not, again, I like substantive things. So some of them are really long. I don't publish with this, I don't approach it, maybe I don't approach it with enough of a business sense. The way that I approach it is I want to share something that I feel proud of and that I think is worthwhile. So I'm not producing content just for the sake of it, just to keep up with a schedule. I'm not putting that down, by the way. I'm just saying that my motivation is to try to come up with the best and most interesting and potentially helpful, relevant, inspiring content that I can, and then put it out there. So my blog, you'll notice if you look in the archives of my blog, my posting is very erratic. There's no timetable. It's when I think I have something of potential interest or value to share. Sure. So, with that said, though, with the podcasting, I did a fair amount of research about it. The thing about it is like with anything, you can fall into analysis paralysis. Podcasting, if you've never done it, hugely intimidating in part because there are a million decisions to make. I mean, it's endless.
Right.
There's so many services for every possible piece of the puzzle that you have to figure out which one you're going to use, which is better than which has the features that you most need, what price points, all this stuff. And I mean, like I would imagine that there are many people out there who have the idea of starting a podcast and it never gets off the ground simply because of all of the decisions that need to be made.
Right.
Which microphone, which pair of headphones, which service platform are you going to use to record on? Are you going to do video or just audio? Who are you going to have what service are you going to use to distribute the podcast? What's the format going to be like? Is it good? I mean, like it's endless. So once I came up with the concept for my podcast is called The Person You Want to Be. And what I am hoping to achieve with the podcast is to interview the guests that I have on, not just about the work that they do, although that, of course, will inevitably come up. But I want to get to their personal stories and trajectories. And I want to get some insights into the inflection points in their lives, the big decisions they had to make, how they have asserted their desires and goals and aspirations to the best of their ability, how they have decided, who they were going to be in the world and how they were going to go about becoming that. And it's inherently in the title, The Person You Want to Be is inherently aspirational. So it's about who you're trying to be, who you wish to be. Now, what I love about it is, and I haven't said this yet on a show, but I will undoubtedly, is I introduce the guest, and then after the introduction explaining about their background and who they are, I say, welcome, Karen, to the person you want to be. I love that. I don't know if it registers on the other end, but it's like, welcome, you have arrived. You are now the person you want to be. And a lot of the people that I have on, well, they're living examples of being the person they want to be. Now, maybe not 100%, maybe not in every possible way and aspect, but if they're on the show, it's most likely because they are already becoming the person they want to be. Right. And it's had an impact. It's had enough of an impact that they're on my radar and now they're on my show. So did I answer your question?
And you did. and I love how you did it, because to the listeners out there, and especially those who are saying, hey, I've always thought about having a podcast, and we've talked about this before. Some of us plan ahead. We do all this research before our first podcast. And then we don't get a lot of hits on that first podcast and we go, oh my, what did I do wrong? I did a little differently than you did. And look I'm in year 8 of doing it.
Wow, that's amazing.
And only 5 under this umbrella.
Mhm.
Okay. And
Only still, that's amazing.
yeah. And
How many podcasts even make it a year? I bet it's a small percent.
And it's I'm doing it because when I bring my guests on, like you, or I listen to your first podcast with Gary Scott, it's like I'm learning something.
Hmm.
Your life may be totally different than mine. And we discussed this when you were on Heart Mojo. There was Eric in his early 50s. There was Melinda.
Not yet. I'm actually going to be 50, just for the record.
Sorry. Okay, going to be. Okay. And then there was Melinda, who's going to be 60. And here I am, 72. But as we're talking together, you would have thought, we were sitting in the high school cafeteria talking about the same things that we were interested in. And this is the message I want people to hear. We are not so different from each other. We may wear our hair differently. We may have more of an accent. Our skin tone may be different. But we all want that same thing. We all want to live a good life. And that good life may be about money, but it doesn't always have to be. And prior to this podcast, I was talking to my son. And for those of you listening, keep watching my Facebook page because I hope to have an announcement here in the next couple of days. But here's a young man who all of his life has dreamed and dreamed and dreamed about something he really wants to do. And it is at his feet now. Now he's got to make a decision. And as a parent, I'm sitting back so proud, even though there have been days in the 31 plus years of his life where I wanted to just wring his neck and say, hey, listen to me. But it's not about listening to me or to you, Eric. It's about observing and making the mistakes along the way and learning from them and sharing them with each other. So today, when I was listening to Gary Scott talking about mountain climbing, I sat here, my first reaction was, couldn't you have had somebody else that I could relate to? But within seconds, I was relating. I'm climbing my own mountains. My son is climbing his. We don't have to be on the same path, but we can share our journeys with each other. And the way you shared Gary's journey, and I'm hoping everybody goes out and finds the person you want to be, because it instills you that you can do it. You don't have to wait for something to fall from the sky. So we've talked about you in the past, that you were into music. You thought that was going to be your pathway. But why is it our society looks at us and says, well, you've changed your career so many times. When are you going to grow up? When are you going to mature? And I'm so glad that I've changed my career numerous times in my life because I found my happiness. So have you had that same dialogue going on around you? Like, when are you going to settle down, Eric?
Have I? Wow. The short answer is yes. Absolutely. I don't remember if I've mentioned this to you before, but some years ago on my blog, I actually wrote what ended up being a 10-part series about this very subject. And you can go find it on my blog. If you go to ericteplitz.com, probably the easiest way to find it is there's a menu option for blog. And if you search my blog archives, it won't take you long before you find this 10-part series called What Do You Want to Be When You Grow Up? And where to begin with this? The blog series, I start the first post by just introducing the question itself. and how loaded of a question it is. Now, it's often asked of us very innocently and very even curiously and possibly supportively when we're kids. What do you want to be when you grow up? Now, but this question continues. And as far as I'm concerned, you have to answer it every day. Do you want to continue being what you are, doing what you're doing? Do you want to do something else? There are so many implications behind that question, depending upon the context in which it is asked. And so I spend the first blog post just talking about the question itself and why it's such a, I guess you could say, difficult question to answer, and also why it can put pressure on you. There can be expectations put on you by it. Not necessarily, but often there are implications. There is a subtext to the question. So the first post, and I didn't know how many posts it was going to be when I started it. It was like an exploration. So I did the first post about the question. And then I decided I'm going to chronicle my own personal journey of attempting to answer that question. What do you want to be when you grow up? From as far back as I can remember, my earliest memories to the present. And to just retrace my own journey. And it took 9 more posts. Well, I guess it took 8 more posts, and then I had a conclusion post, which was the last post. And by the way, I don't expect you to be interested in all the intricacies and details and tedium of my life. So if this subject interests you, maybe just read the first post and then go right to the last.
Okay.
Now, if you are curious and you want to know about my own journey, be my guest. It's all there. But I think that the last post actually was one of the more popular posts I've ever written, and it definitely resonated with people. So this idea of who do you want to be? What do you want to be? There are a lot of pressures that come at us from every direction, right? There's your family, there's your culture, there's your peers, there's the culture you grow up in. We all face these different pressures. We put pressure on ourselves, but we are inevitably affected deeply, profoundly, I would suggest more than we can even know, by our environments. And so this issue of trying to wrestle with, first of all, trying to just even get through all the noise of everyone else's agenda, and to tune in to really answering the question for yourself. What is it that you really want to be when you grow up? And by the way, when you grow up is kind of a condescending phrase, isn't it? Because it implies you're not grown up yet.
Right.
Number one. And it's also, you never get there. It's not like you arrive and suddenly you're grown up. If you're breathing, if you have a pulse, then, hopefully
you're still growing. Yeah.
You're still, hopefully you're still growing and changing. And so you asked about, changing careers. And it doesn't have to just be with career.
Right.
I think that at different stages of your life, naturally, your priorities are going to change inevitably. And that's fine. That's good. Like that's, but we can really do a number on ourselves. And if you read the posts in between 1 and 10, I talk about that, because I really, for a good number of years, especially in my 20s, really was just savagely, brutally self-critical. And I think that this is a common experience. And it's sad because I think that it causes a lot of unnecessary suffering. Now, maybe you have to do some of that before you realize this isn't working and helping, right? And I think it takes time and maturity and maybe some wisdom to relax that inner taskmaster, that inner critic, cracking the whip, being just absolutely unforgivingly brutal about judging yourself for whatever are your perceived failures or missteps, or why can't I get my act together? Why can't I why can't I do X, Y, or Z? And believe me, I know from experience that, because I was really good at that, turns out it doesn't help.
Doesn't, you're right. And you know, what I find interesting is that I've always been my biggest critic. Okay. My parents would always say to me, why do you have to say that about yourself when I brought up something negative? But I was doing it because I was expecting others to do it.
Sure.
And so, you know, I'm going to tell you why I'm not good at this. And I remember when I was going through my first divorce, I've only had one divorce. When I was going through my divorce, the blame really was on the two of us. We never should have been married in the first place, which is sad. But oftentimes
should have according to whom?
Well, to myself, okay. There was not the real connection that there should have been. Or I would have liked to have had. Okay.
Yeah, should is a really interesting word. And when you catch yourself, I mean, when I catch myself saying it, I have to try to catch it quickly and say, according to whom.
Yeah.
Should.
Right.
No.
But when I was going through it, it was so much easier to either blame my husband at the time or put the blame on me. And I did both. And it took many years for me to like sort of wake up and say, it really wasn't his fault. And I'm not such a bad person either. And so all of a sudden, those around me started noticing, like, who are you today? Okay. You're not wallowing in pity. Mm-hmm. You're not afraid of your next step all of a sudden. But it still took many steps forward where I still was, you know, belittling myself, you know, getting back out in the dating world at the time was like, well, who's going to want me? You know, I'm used goods. That was an old saying from many generations before. But like you, when I look back at my life, I know that's the past. I can tell you areas where I got smarter, that I was willing to say, hey, what can I learn from that? And keep looking forward. I don't have to be 30 years old to have a future. I can be 40, or I can be in my 70s or my 80s. And that's why I love these conversations, because we share so much in common. You know, those voices in our head are real, and we're not insane when we tell you about them.
Not only do you have a future, whatever age you are, but perhaps more importantly, you have a present, you have a now. That's all that we ever have, right? Now, we spend a lot of our nows dwelling on the past or projecting and worrying about the future. But the fact is that there's only ever now. You have a present moment. There's that expression, you know, the reason they call it the present is because it's a gift.
Yes.
I'm butchering it, but like, you know, that's the essence of it. That's all you ever have is now. And the questions about past decisions and perhaps things you regret or worries about decisions you're going to make or what will come of them in the future, I'm not saying that those aren't worth considering and reflecting on. But what am I saying about that? The fact is that the gift is now. And the question is what are you going to do now? And what makes sense for you now? What feels right to you now? Like, you don't know do I know what's going to come of my podcast? No, I don't have expectations. I do my best. You know, I think I may have mentioned this again, like one of my latest mantra that I keep coming back to is explorations over expectations. I love it because I'm human. I am guilty of like having expectations and then being disappointed when they don't, you know, you're not always aware, by the way, when you have them. That's the thing. Right. You think you're like, oh, I'm just da, 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 da. And then like, if you find yourself really disappointed about something, guess what? You had an expectation that wasn't met. So, you know, we're human. Of course, we're going to have some, but the idea is to kind of manage those as best we can. And instead, look at things as explorations and being curious about, well, this feels good to me. This feels right for me now. And so I'm going to explore it and see what comes of it. And maybe it's a dead end. Maybe its only purpose is to lead me to the next thing. And then that thing is going to be more meaningful or right or whatever. There's so much. I mean, we could talk about this, Karen, forever. But you talked about the self-critical voice, and I think it's a very common experience for people. And a couple things to say about that. Number one, as you already indicated, it comes from a self-protective place. Okay.
Yep.
So what that means is that it could mean a few things. Number one, you're going to put yourself down or cut yourself down before anyone else has a chance to. So it's a defense mechanism. It's a protective gesture so that you can shield yourself and kind of like make yourself smaller before anyone else has a chance to. All right, that's number one. Number two is you would never most likely have the kind of judgments when you're in that self-critical mode. You would never be so relentless and harsh and brutal on someone else, especially someone you actually cared about, right? But even someone maybe you don't care about that much, you would never be that. Like, that would be inhumane to treat someone that way. And yet we do it to ourselves. And so if you're in that, if you're having that experience of putting yourself down or criticizing yourself or harshly judging yourself, ask yourself if you could externalize the self that you're judging, okay, and make it a different person, someone other than you. And the fact is, it is another person. If you're judging your past self, that was another person. That person didn't have the same resources that you do, emotionally, intellectually, whatever, in whatever other ways. And usually you will notice that people are doing at any given point, people are doing the best they can, given all the givens. And there are a lot of givens. And most of those givens, we don't even know. We don't have that information. So when people act rudely, it's natural to get irritated. But what led up to that moment? You have no idea what that person's history is. You have no idea what has happened to them, what they're going through. It's very, 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 very difficult, by the way, to have the presence of mind to realize that and then be a little softer, be a little kinder in the moment. Very hard to do. It takes a lot of practice. Right. And even still, you're going to have days where you're more equipped to do it. And you're going to have days where maybe you didn't sleep so well. You don't have the bandwidth for it.
Right, exactly.
So, the message here is both compassion and self-compassion. And to try, we're all, your show is called Avoid the Maze. And yeah, good luck avoiding it, right? But maybe what we can do is become more skillful at navigating it, because we can't see the end point. We don't know where each corner and turn is going to take us. So, but what we can do is give ourselves a better experience of going through it and not like beating ourselves up when we hit a dead end, or, we can see it more as we can be more playful about going through the maze. If you watch kids, like if you put kids in a labyrinth, they'll probably be giggling and like enjoying the experience, however frustrating it might appear. But as we get older, we tend to lose that sort of sense of, sadly, a lot of times joy and play, and not taking it so seriously, not taking ourselves so seriously. You know what? I hate to break it to you, whoever's listening. We're all going to die. Okay. Some point,
right?
No one knows when. It might happen to all of us at the same time. Probably not, but it's going to happen, right? So, keep that in mind and just do the best you can, and know that the things that you're agonizing over now, a very short amount of time from now, are so not going to matter to anyone, including yourself. Might be hard to believe in the moment, especially if you're really suffering. And I'm not diminishing that. And I'm also I also really believe that it takes, when we're in a grief mode, it just takes as long as it takes to grieve. And also when we're wounded by life, there's an argument that yes, wounds, there's this expression, time heals all wounds.
Right.
One of my favorite expressions came from a fortune cookie that said, nature, time, and patience are the three great physicians. Talk about a wise cookie.
Right. Huh? Yeah.
I never forgot that.
Right.
Nature, time, and patience are the three great physicians. Okay. That being said, time heals all wounds. Well, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I'm thinking death probably heals all wounds. In other words, I think you may never fully recover from an injury, whether it's a physical injury or an emotional injury, trauma. You may not 100% recover. That's part of the human condition. And maybe there's a good reason for that. I don't know about reasons, but what I'm trying to say is there's some good that can come out of that, because if a part of you never fully recovers from an injury, then there's always going to be a part of you that's your heart is going to be more open, and you're going to be more compassionate and empathetic to others going through something like that. If you if you got over everything 100%, you'd be like, get over yourself when someone scratches their knee or worse. But if you have lingering psychological / emotional pain, there is good that can come from that. And that can manifest in so many ways. You might start a podcast discussing issues and bringing them out into the open so people don't feel so alone. You might create some kind of piece of art that communicates this shared universal experience that we all have. And again, it doesn't have to be, the specifics can be different person to person, but we all have the same range of experience as a human in terms of the kinds of things we can feel and go through subjectively. So I don't know, just some food for thought.
Well, and as you were talking about the maze and how children can go through it and find it funny, maybe bumping into the walls on purpose, right. Rolling on the ground, or standing on somebody's shoulder to try to go over a wall. I have learned, and I think my husband is finally glad that I'm learning this at this stage of life. But I've learned not to take everything so seriously. And for most of my life, I did. Okay. If I went to work and somebody said something that I took as a criticism, I just buried myself into making it right and driving myself bonkers that I sometimes had to go to the ladies' room and shed a few chairs. And now I look back at some of those things that happened, and it's like, I didn't have to take it that way, but I did, because I didn't have the tools that I have now. And the tools I have now are a lot from experience, but it's a lot by sharing with others like yourself and my other guests when they tell me that.
And also, even if you still experience that, we all, we're human, right? So it's not like you ever master. I have one of my favorite posts that I've written, and I also did a video that's sort of an offshoot of it. The post is called Zen Master Training. And then I did a video, I think it's called Life as Zen Master Training, that talks about the same kind of subject. And it's this idea that we never get there. This whole thing is a training ground, right. And we have to learn the same lessons over and over and over again. And hopefully we improve, a bit at a time in some fashion, and we backslide and but it's not like you reach a point where I'm now immune to criticism. I will never get my feelings hurt again because I've mastered, I know better. No, come on. I mean, we're human, so it's okay. And it also shows that, you're sensitive. It comes from and being sensitive is a good thing. Now, I had so many things that I wanted to respond to, and what you were saying, I can't even remember them all. But that was one of them.
Well, and I know there's nothing terrible about being sensitive.
Oh, I know what it was.
Okay, go ahead.
It's this idea of you taking yourself seriously, right? Like both are true. You should scratch that. Taking yourself seriously and not taking yourself seriously are both extremely worthwhile things to do. And the art of life is figuring out which is called for. So there are times when it's absolutely called for. You know, it's good to take yourself and your life seriously. It's the one life you got as far as we know. There's so much we don't know. I mean, anyone who claims to know, come on. I mean, you know, that's the thing. We're just in this maze and we're just like here. We don't know why we were put here and what, you know, but and there's all kinds, there's a range of things. There's things that are sharp and hurtful in this maze. And there are things that are so beautiful, you just want to cry.
Right.
And so it's like, this is the journey that we're on. And yeah, so, you know, you got to know when to hold them. You got to know when to fold them. But taking yourself seriously is not a bad thing in and of itself.
Exactly.
And taking yourself and not taking yourself seriously, it's all about context, right?
And that's the big thing that I've learned at this stage of my life. And it's the one thing that I've been able to share more with my youngest son, because he had been bullied through elementary and high school, and he still carries that on his shoulders.
Sure.
And luckily he's really worked through it. And in the beginning, when he was going through all this, my mother would say to me, just tell him he's okay. And I said, I can't tell him that. I can tell him he can work at it, but he's got to do the work. I just can't say you're going to be okay. I said, you know how many times you told me I was going to be okay and I wasn't, and I got mad at you because now what did I do? And it took her almost until she was on her deathbed to finally say to me, I'm so sorry I steered you in the wrong direction. And I said, no, you made me think. And that was a good thing. You gave me that opportunity to say, okay, you said I was going to be good. I'm not good. All right, let's figure it out. And that's what your listeners, I'm sure, are getting out of your podcast. You know, it's not necessarily about climbing a mountain and being, you know, getting higher than Gary Scott or higher than you on the mountain. It's all about doing what works for you. And if you make a mistake, it's okay. We have to learn from those mistakes. And if you choose not to, then you may repeat them over and over again. And
oh yeah.
Again, it's your choice. And like I started out asking, you know, you are more of a planner than I am when it comes to the podcast. It was my desire for my podcast. And that's why when all our listeners go and listen to you, I want them to see there is a difference. Maybe the messages are very much the same, but I need to hear my voice after I post it. I have to go back and say to myself, what did you get out of this? And yours is a different journey. And I think that's great. I think that we, amongst thousands of podcasters out there, we're filling a void for a lot of people. And I'm proud of that.
Well, we're having a conversation. And so hopefully others can benefit in some way from that conversation, recognize themselves in it and take something from it. That's the hope. You know, you talked about the parental message of it's going to be okay, or you're going to be okay. And I think that comes from a very well-intended place.
Oh, sure.
But the thing that is, I'm not a parent, by the way, but I can only imagine how difficult it must be for a parent to want for their child that they feel okay about themselves. And they might do whatever they can to try to reassure their child that they're a good person and that the things will work out, or they're going to be okay. And we can't control most things in life. So if you're a control freak, I recommend not being a parent. Okay. Unless you want some like really serious Zen Master training on learning how to let go of that, which maybe you do. But the thing is that the child, whomever they are, that message has to come at some point from within. In other words, all the people in the world can reassure them or tell them they're good and they're okay. One of the most challenging parts of life, I think, is deciding that, giving yourself that message, and in a way you could call it parenting yourself, being your own parent when you're old, we all need, when we're growing up, we need, whether it's a biological parent or some helpful person more experienced than us who cares about us,
Right.
in whatever form that appears. And I wish that for everyone, for sure. But at some point we have to be able to parent ourselves, and we have to be our own best friend. And no one can do that for us, no matter how devoted they are, no matter how dedicated they are, no matter how much they genuinely love and care for us. We have to be able to do that for ourselves. And I think that for a lot of people, perhaps myself included, is a lifelong journey. Hopefully we make progress at it.
Well, you are so right there. It took me a long time to really honestly say that I like myself. And it's okay, if it is a journey, and it's not an easy journey, because as you said, family, culture, all the things that come around us. And it's getting more and more difficult with the internet, even what we're doing right now, throwing out messages, whereas, 50, 60 years ago, it really was your small little community. So,
there's trade-offs. There's things that are, as with everything, I think that the internet makes things, some things remarkably better.
Absolutely.
And others not so much.
So going back to the person you want to be, 2 weeks ago, you posted episode 1. This week, you posted episode 2. And
today, in fact.
Today.
Yeah. So my schedule is every other Tuesday.
Okay.
And so so I was deliberate about this. So while I did put a lot of thought into the podcast ahead of time and decided how I wanted to go about it, I wanted to do my best to adhere to a consistent schedule, and one that was reasonable for myself. And I decided to come up with every other week. And I felt like that will allow me to keep up. But I also waited until I had a fair amount already recorded before I even put out the trailer, because and in fact, I used clips in my trailer. My trailer is a minute long, and it has little clips of a bunch of different interviews in it. I'm proud of it. It took a lot of work, but it communicates, I think, the essence of the show. So I tried to give myself this runway, and have a pipeline of episodes already recorded, so I can always be a little bit ahead, and then release them at a pace that feels like I can keep it going, because I do want to be consistent about it. And I want to approach it as a long-term project. Now, will I make it 5 years or 8 like you?
You will.
Who knows? I mean, who knows? But I'm taking it seriously. See, and I'm going in it with the intent not to if I'm not viral by episode 6, then I'm out of here. I mean, that's not how I'm thinking about it. It's right. First of all, it's a project that's very personally meaningful to me and gratifying for me. So it's intrinsically rewarding. And I recommend to listeners or viewers that whenever you can find something that's intrinsically rewarding, go for it, because you're not going to be so attached to the results. I mean, of course, we always want good results, but the doing of it should be a win in and of itself. And each time I make it to, I've now published a new episode. And by the way, it's a lot of work getting there. But when I finally do publish it, it's like, achievement for me, like a win for me. I may this go out in the world and do some good, but just I was, you know what it was, is I saw my commitment to myself through. And to use the phrase that this guest of mine that I interview on episode 2, Eric Mazel, says a lot, and it means a lot to me. He says, make yourself proud. And so whenever you can do something where you are making yourself proud, or, you know, you think about the choices that you have, you can ask yourself, what decision here would make me proud? I think it's a great way, it's a great metric to use for conducting your life as best as you can with the inevitably limited knowledge that we all have at any given point in time, and limited understanding and limited resources. We're human. If you can operate in the world as much as possible each day in a way where you make yourself proud, I think that's the best we can do.
Absolutely. So how can my listeners find you? We know that you have a website.
Yeah.
But any other way?
You can come, don't come knocking on my door. How can they find me? Well, the internet, you can find anyone. But the easiest thing to do is to go to my website. It's just my name, Eric with a C, Teplitz.com. And hopefully Karen will have the spelling of that on, so you can find it. But if you go to my website, it's a great starting point, because from my website, you can access my course that I'm very proud of, called Opening to Greater Possibilities. You can access my blog with over 100 archived posts in it, and it's a lot of material. So find what, you can literally search by topic or by a keyword, or just look through, you can scroll through the whole list of titles until you find one that piques your interest and start there. You can find my podcast as well. So there's a menu option now. So from my main website, it'll take you right to my podcast. I've got a YouTube channel. So I decided to do with my podcast, I decided to record video as well as audio. And so you have the option, you can listen. It's available on all the platforms where you would likely hear podcasts. And, but you can also, if you want to view it, you can see the interview on YouTube.
Love it.
Yeah, anyway, so if you go to my website, it's all there. And as well as, if you're interested, I offer to anyone a free coaching session / consultation call, totally free of charge, no pressure. There's no Amway scheme at the end. I love doing this. And actually, a lot of people have benefited from literally just the one call with me. If I can help people just clarify something, give them a little push perhaps to go in a specific direction of their choosing, but just a word of encouragement and perhaps an idea or a new way of thinking about something. Sometimes just a single call can really make a difference. And so I encourage anyone that's interested to take me up on that offer.
Well, again, we'll do this next month. We'll come up with another subject. And I think what I'm going to do, again, like I did the last time, I'm going to go through those blogs again, because that's where I was getting even more inspired. It was like, that's me. And if it's me, it's probably our listeners as well. We will have all this information in the show notes. So there's no excuse for anybody listening to say, I don't even remember Eric's name, and it will be written there along with his website and all the links. And again, thank you so much. And now I have to go listen to episode 2.
Please do. Karen,
Yes,
thank you so much. It's always a joy every time we have a conversation. So thank you so much for having me on and inviting me and to be a recurring guest. And it's always lovely. So thank you.
I love it. Have a great day. Be well.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.